energy drinks. This mistake could result in someone accidentally drinking alcohol.
I don't know what's actually worse there. Someone accidentally drinking alcohol or someone trying on purpose to drink something called Astro Vibe Sparkling Blue Raz. A series of words that would feel more at home on a container of discount lube. Or an unregulated edible slime that gave 80s kids weird thyroids. But sadly, we don't have time to get into all that because, to quote the least horny message you could possibly get on Hinge, we need to talk about Gaza, which, as you probably know, is in the midst of a devastating crisis.
The world seeing images like these. Desperate families in Gaza reaching through bars, begging for food. The Hamas-run health ministry says 147 people have died from famine and malnutrition. 88 of them, children. Today in Gaza City, this mother carrying home a single bowl of thin soup for 3 children then gathering around to eat. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists there is no starvation.
There is no policy of starvation in Gaza, and there is no starvation in Gaza.
Yeah, are you sure about that though? Because we can all see it right in front of us, and it's frankly insulting to think you can deflect our attention with all the skill of a shitty magician. Ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing in this hat. Oh, fuck off! I can see its ears and it smells like rabbit shit in here. How stupid do you think we are? And it is notable that at this point, even Trump isn't buying it.
Prime Minister Netanyahu said there's no starvation in Gaza. Do you agree with that assessment?
I don't know. I mean, based on television, I would say not particularly, because those children look very hungry.
Okay. Describing starving children as looking very hungry is a massive understatement, right up there with "we were just friends." But while that was a rare moment of Trump expressing something resembling empathy, he still managed to make everything about himself, despite something a little distracting happening just off camera. And see if your ears notice it.
We have a lot of starving people. We have people that, the United States recently, just a couple of weeks ago, we gave $60 billion. It's a lot of money. No other nation gave money, but we gave $60 billion. Nobody said even thank you. Thanks. Somebody should say thank you.
Okay. Before we go any further, I love that no one thought to ask the bagpiper to stop playing or for Trump to stop talking. Instead, they went with option 3, let them both simultaneously blow hot air through their tiny holes. I hate the bagpipes. They sound terrible, and anyone playing them looks like they're giving head to an upside-down ostrich. But if there were ever a good time for bagpipes to ruin a moment, Trump making himself the victim during a humanitarian crisis is definitely it. Now, he is overstating how much the US has given there and understating how much everyone else has. But regardless, experts agree the amount of aid getting into Gaza is still not nearly enough. But that has less to do with how much has been given and more to do with how aid is being distributed. Because after nearly 3 months of Israel blockading all food into Gaza, in May, they shifted aid distribution away from the UN and other NGOs to a new organisation called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is backed by the American and Israeli governments. It's a brand new organisation that's never distributed aid before. And on its watch, the number of distribution sites has been dramatically reduced. Not just that, the openings of the 4 sites it operates are often announced with just a few minutes warning, and they can remain open for as little as 8 minutes at a time. Look, 8 minutes can seem like an age in some contexts, like during a pap smear, or when Dave Matthews says he's only going to do one more song. But it is clearly not enough for thousands of people to get food safely, and these sites are dangerous. The AP's reported more than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli fire while seeking aid since May, most of them near those sites. Although Israel's recently made a big show of coordinating airdrops with foreign governments, that's far less effective than you might think. Experts say airdrops should be considered an absolute last resort because they're very expensive, often ineffective and not sustainable. And journalists who've tagged along on those drops have seen that borne out.
What you see here are about 20 pallets a day. That's roughly the equivalent to 1 truck entering Gaza. It certainly looks good, but it's not big enough. World Food Program says they need at least 600 trucks entering Gaza by road every single day if they're going to make any dent in this crisis.
The pallets of aid parachuted down to the scorched earth below, but this can also be hazardous.
the food as long as you want it to arrive both not enough and in the ocean. And it's not just ineffective as a food delivery system, it's dangerous and demeaning. If you order DoorDash, you don't want it out to tell you your burrito is in the Hudson River, go with fetch. And these are explanations for why they've shifted to this model. Just don't stand up and repeatedly claim the UN is not distributing aid, though as the UN points out, that's mainly because Israel frequently denies or delays its requests to bring in convoys. They've also claimed UN aid was routinely getting stolen by Hamas. No, two top Israeli military officials reportedly admitted there's no proof of that happening. And incredibly, some in the US continue to minimize the horrors in Gaza. When the Times appended an editor's note to a front-page article about a malnourished child, acknowledging he had pre-existing health problems, some pounced on that, or even questioned whether we should believe any of the photos of starvation out of Gaza.
You've got the New York Times that has a photo of this poor Palestinian kid, this all skin and bones, and they're basically assigning the responsibility of starvation in Palestine. Turns out he has cystic fibrosis and has absolutely nothing to do with the Israelis. Another one showed a very emaciated child, but it was because he had a disease. He was standing next to a mother by any standards. Let's just say she was very well fed. So somebody was in it. It may not have been the child.
I'm always reluctant to put too much stock in the images coming out of Gaza that freeze because they're manipulated and they're masters of propaganda and they're fine having their own children starve just as long as they can put them on camera and show them off.
Children, and this is true, also need food to live. Second, bad sounds. I don't think you can disprove mass starvation in an area where I saw a picture of one sturdy mom. Third, I kind of hoped we were done with Megyn Kelly as a society, and collectively, you don't actually have to litigate this case. One photo at a time. The UN World Food Programme has said of Gaza nearly 500,000 people are facing famine-like conditions, and a third of the population is going days without food. And there have been similar assessments from the OPC, the over 100 other agencies and organisations, including Amnesty International, Christian Aid, Mercy Corps, and Oxfam. And even if you distrust the UN and those organisations, I'll point out these Israeli human rights groups have come to the same conclusion, as has Israel's oldest daily newspaper, as have multiple first-hand accounts from physicians on the ground. What's happening in Gaza right now is a famine. All the information we have points to that, except for the word of this fucking guy and a few adult junior detectives squinting at each photo of a skeletal child to figure out if they're the right kind of dying. And it's really hard not to think that the reason aid isn't getting into the people in Gaza is that Netanyahu and key people in his government don't want it to. And some have made this explicit. Back in May, his national security minister entrance of aid trucks into the Gaza Strip a grave mistake that delays our victory. And his finance minister has said it may be just and moral to starve Gaza until Israeli hostages are returned, but no one in the world would let us. Basically complaining that the world is cock-blocking him from committing genocide better. And that is the argument for sustained international pressure. And the country best positioned to apply it is this one. The one that gave Israel nearly $18 billion in military aid during the first year of this war alone. Look, Gaza is starving. It's a sentence that's objectively true. But it's also slightly misleading because it's too passive. Gaza is being starved by Israel. And what's so frustrating is that most humanitarian disasters don't come with solutions as straightforward as this one. Hurricanes don't tend to have kill switches that you can flip. You can't stop a pandemic by simply hanging a do not infect sign on your door. But this famine truly does have an off button, as it's entirely man-made, and we need to fucking press it. As one expert on famines has said, if Netanyahu decided tonight that every Palestinian child in Gaza should have breakfast tomorrow, it could undoubtedly be done. So it's long past time for the US to stop being complicit in this, because unless we actively stop it, Netanyahu seems more than willing to continue choking off aid to the point that what's getting through is sometimes quite literally a drop in the fucking ocean. And now, this.
And now, WDKY anchor Tyler Melino is a Disney adult.
It is time for what day is it? And today we're embracing the magic of Disney.
No, you went out that one. This is a
Specifically, we're going to talk about corporate, something our current president is famously not that considerate about, not only is he convicted on 34 counts of falsifying business records, but got caught to be worse. CNBC said about a law banning American companies from bribing foreign governments. And I'll let this anti-corruption activist pick up the story from there.
I was asked to announce candidacy and give the anti-corruption argument. And I remember laughing at the time saying, well, is there somebody that you know who's willing to make a corruption argument?
They clearly got the right guy then. I can only assume the producer at CNBC said to their assistant, we need someone willing to give the pro-corruption argument who's the most unethical person you can think of, to which they replied, easily the hamburger. To which the producer said, no, wait, what? No, like a real person. To which they said, wait, that hamburger's not real. To which the producer said, no, he's a fictional character. To which this is quite natural. To which the producer said, what do you? To which they said, I'm marrying the hamburger. To which the producer said, I'm sorry, what? To which the producer said, let's not talk about it. How about we get Donald Trump? To which the producer said, oh, that is a good idea. Are you trying? To which the producer said, yes, sorry, this hamburger news is just hitting me pretty hard. To which the producer said, did you really have a crush on a cartoon beef thief? To which they replied, the whole bunch what it was! A story not to go cry in the bathroom for. Anyway, the point is, of course they got Donald Trump to defend corruption on live TV, and since taking office, his administration's halted or dropped more than 100 enforcement actions against corporate misconduct, and he even issued the first ever pardon of the corporation, pardoning this cryptocurrency exchange, which will be sentenced to a $100 million fine for violating an anti-money laundering. It was actually not only. Experts have called this moment the ripest environment for corruption by public officials and business executives in a generation. But to be fair, it's not that the environment was exactly unripe before Trump took office. Republican and Democratic administrations have not taken a lax approach to corporate crime for a while. And what I've noticed, stories about corporate malfeasance rarely end with the executives going to jail or the companies getting shut down. And tonight's story is going to focus on a key reason for that: deferred prosecution agreements, or DPAs. They're basically an out-of-court settlement for companies not being prosecuted. Essentially, the government will come to a company and say, hi, company, government people, you did a crime, and we have enough evidence to prosecute you. But instead of them doing that, they strike a deal where the company behaves itself for some time, criminal charges eventually disappear. Sometimes they'll go with an even weaker option, a non-prosecution agreement called NPA, which doesn't even have to be filed in court. But either way, they're terms that tend to slide past you whenever you hear them on the news.
The Justice Department announcing a deferred prosecution agreement with Teva Pharmaceuticals.
Energy entered into what's called a deferred prosecution agreement.
McKinsey has also entered into a deferred prosecution agreement. Uber has entered into a non-prosecution agreement. Credit Suisse close to finalizing that deferred prosecution agreement. What's known as a deferred prosecution agreement? Deferred prosecution agreement. Deferred prosecution agreement.
Every bank on Wall Street has a deferred prosecution or an NPA. Every bank has more than one, most likely.
It's true. AIG has 2 NPAs and a DPA. Barclays has a DPA and an NPA. Credit Suisse has a DPA. JP Morgan has an NPA and a DPA. Lloyds has 2 DPAs. The Royal Bank of Scotland has a DPA. Wachovia has a DPA and an NPA. And UBS has a DPA and 2 NPAs. And just so you know, when I say a sentence like UBS has a DPA and 2 NPAs, I do hear myself. I'm fully aware that one day this show will just be me reading one long acronym for 40 minutes. We'll have achieved our perfect form, and on that day, I'll finally be allowed to die. But the point is, these agreements are absolutely everywhere. Honestly, the only things more ubiquitous than DPAs on Wall Street are police vests and undiagnosed sociopaths. Unfortunately, as you're about to see, DPAs don't really do much. In fact, sometimes companies that have done massive harm have used them to literally get away with murder. So given that, tonight, let's talk about deferred prosecution agreements, where they came from, how ineffective they can be, and a few amazing examples of what they can look like in practice. Let's start with the fact that DPAs were never actually intended to be used on corporations. The concept grew out of a 1974 law that was meant to help first-time and juvenile non-violent offenders avoid prosecution so they could focus on rehabilitation. But that is not how we use them today. And you can trace the explosion of corporate DPAs back to one of the most famous times a a large company was prosecuted in this country, Arthur Andersen. It was the accounting firm for Enron, whose name is now synonymous with accounting fraud. Very basically, with the help of Andersen, Enron completely invented future earnings for itself. And when the government tried to investigate, Andersen undertook a massive document purge during which they deleted around 30,000 computer files and emails, and at one point shredded more documents in 3 days than they usually destroyed in a year. Something that became so famous, it was even parodied in a Heineken commercial, where the documents became snowflakes, and the tagline was, "To all those who weren't naughty this year, happy holidays." And just think how remarkable that is. A beer company thought to themselves, you know, we could just show off our crisp, refreshing product in this commercial, but instead, let's give people what they really want this Christmas and say, fuck you to an accounting firm. But the thing is, the Justice Department actually got a lot of blowback for prosecuting Andersen because at the time it was a massive firm with 28,000 employees, many of whom felt like they'd done nothing wrong.
After weeks of suffering in silence, Andersen workers have found their voice.
Fight! Stand tall! Don't give up! By the grace of God, we're gonna win because we're Andersen!
Everybody you see out here is worried about their job right now.
We're all being penalized for something that we didn't have anything to do with.
Yeah, Arthur Andersen's employees felt a range of emotions, from resentment to anxiety to whatever. Unbridled exuberance. Let's describe this Price is Right contestant who just won a Honda Civic. And they were right to be concerned. Andersen being convicted of a felony meant they lost their accounting license, which for an accounting firm is generally not great for business. The company eventually folded, thousands of people lost their jobs, and many, like his Andersen partner, placed the blame squarely on the government.
In the history of the world of business, this will come out, in my judgment, as the largest act of corporate murder ever.
Okay, that is a wild overstatement though, because what happened to Andersen is a lot more complicated than that. The company had started shedding clients long before their conviction, and the SEC was already investigating them. So the truth is, Andersen was likely heading out of business anyway. So this is what doomed Andersen is not saying the ground, is what doomed the Hindenburg. Sure, it might have been the final issue it encountered, but things weren't exactly smooth sailing before then. But after Andersen, prosecutors became very reluctant to risk putting a company out of business, and that is when DPAs became popular. In the decade prior to Andersen's collapse, DPAs and MPAs had been used just 18 times. But in the 14 years following, the DOJ entered into 419 such settlements, and the argument for DPAs is that they prevent innocent employees from getting hurt, dissuade future wrongdoing, and still allow the DOJ to go after individuals. But there are problems with literally all that. For starters, nearly half of those getting deferred and non-prosecution agreements paid no fine at all. And when it comes to individuals, in 2/3 of cases, no employees were prosecuted. And showing you just how glaringly apparent this system's shortcomings can be, we're going to focus on 3 companies: GM, HSBC, and Boeing. We actually talked about GM all the way back in our first season, but just in case I wasted my precious, let's call it youth, shouting at you about things you don't remember. Here's a quick refresher on what the company did wrong.
Last year, GM began recalling 2.5 million cars with ignition switches that could suddenly shut off the engine, cutting off the power to the airbags and disabling the power steering and power brakes, causing crashes. GM has since determined that the switches caused accidents that led to 124 deaths and 273 injuries.
Yeah, it was a wild story. GM sold cars with faulty switches that could shut off the engine, steering, brakes, and airbags, despite the fact that they are, and this is true, some of the key differences between something being an automobile or a metal coffin moving at 70 miles an hour. And there was evidence the company knew about the problem. In 2008, they showed their employees a PowerPoint encouraging them to avoid words like problem, safety, and defect when writing about GM's cars, and added as a fun joke that they should also probably stay away from terms like Kevorkian-esque, tomb-like, maniacal, or rolling sarcophagus. And I kind of hope that that just inspired GM employees to use other options instead, like the Widowmaker, Chitty Chitty Smashback, Final Destination The Car, and the Lean Mean James Dean Machine. GM reached a DPA with the government in 2015, which meant they didn't have to plead guilty, just agree to a statement of facts about their misconduct. For instance, they admitted that by early 2012, they not only knew about the problem, they were aware of several fatal incidents that may have been caused by the defective switch. And while the law required GM to report such knowledge to the government within 5 days, it took them approximately 20 months, which, fun fact, is around the length of an elephant's gestational period. And if writing an email takes longer than making a fucking elephant from scratch, there is clearly something else going on. Now, as part of GM's DPA, they did have to pay a $900 million fine, and Mary Barra, their then and current CEO, went to great lengths to argue that the deal was not letting them off easy.
This is a tough agreement. It further highlights the mistakes that were made by certain people in GM, and it imposes significant penalties and obligations.
Okay, but I don't know how significant a $900 million fine was to a company whose profits were just under $10 billion that year. I'm not saying it's nothing, but 9% of 1 year's profits just doesn't seem enough for essentially marketing the automotive equivalent of the Titan submersible.